The framers put forth various plans to solve the problem of representation in Congress. What were the advantages and disadvantages of the Virginia plan? What were the advantages and disadvantages of the New Jersey plan? Do you think the Great Compromise was a good solution to the problem of representation? Why or why not? Maybe begin.
In 1787, delegates from 12 states met in Philadelphia to discuss an important issue. This meeting would later be called the Constitutional Convention. At the time, America's government was based upon the Articles of Confederation, but it had many flaws. The framers tried to work together to resolve most of the problems with the Articles. One of the most challenging issues was representation in the legislature, and there were many opinions among the delegates on how to resolve it. The representatives debated this topic for months. Eventually, two plans were created in an attempt to solve this issue: the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan.
The Virginia Plan, written by James Madison, was proposed by Governor Edmund Randolph. It favored large states like Virginia. The plan created two houses of Congress, known as bicameral legislature. Each state would have proportional representation in both houses. This way, the states with the largest percent of the population would control more of the government. This system was good for the principle of majority rule, but did little to protect minority rights. The lower house would be elected by people, while the upper house would be appointed by representatives in the lower house. Bicameral legislation, especially with the lower house electing representatives in the upper house, was a form of Aristotle's government, known as aristocracy, or rule by a few. Smaller states didn't view this as fair, because this form of government didn't take into account their views.
The New Jersey Plan was proposed by William Patterson. On June 15, 1787, the plan was brought to the convention. The New Jersey Plan promoted the views of smaller states through equal representation. They felt that if the Virginia Plan was used, only the states with large populations would get a say. With this plan, the smaller states had the exact same voting power as the larger states, similar to the Articles of Confederation, allowing their views to be represented as well. The New Jersey Plan was ultimately rejected, but it gave the delegates from larger states an idea of what smaller states want.
The United States currently uses bicameral legislation. However, neither the Virginia Plan nor the New Jersey Plan was able to get the majority of the votes. After much debate in Philadelphia, another plan was introduced to the convention. Known as the Connecticut Compromise, now as the Great Compromise, this new plan was proposed by Roger Sherman. The Connecticut Compromise combined the proportional representation, the Virginia Plan, and the equal representation of the New Jersey Plan. The elements of this compromise are laid out in Article 1 of the Constitution. This Congress would have two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. In the Senate, the small states would get their wish of equal representation. Each state would get 2 senators elected to 6-year terms. In the House, each state, based on population, would get a certain amount of representatives elected to 2-year terms.
The representation issue was not only among white, free citizens. The delegates of the convention also had to decide how slaves would be counted toward a state's population, which would count toward the number of representatives each state would have in the House of Representatives. Slavery was a contentious issue at the convention that drove compromise for the sake of getting all states on board. Another compromise, known as the 3/5 Compromise, would count 3 out of every 5 slaves for the state's population. Really, Northerners did not feel that slaves should be counted, but in order to get the Constitution ratified, they gave it an allowing 60% of them.
In October 2013, compromise on the budget wasn't reached, which forced the government to shut down. This directly relates to James Madison's philosophy of frustrated government, meaning that the government would have to go through a long struggle to pass laws. The shutdown represented a compromise, or lack thereof. This is just one of the many instances where our government has to agree on different issues and find a common ground. Thank you.
All right, thank you. What was so bad about the Articles of Confederation? Was there really a need for the Constitutional Convention and a Great Compromise? What were the problems that were solved at the convention?
Well, the Articles of Confederation really catered toward having a weak national government because they were so oppressed for so long by such a strong national government that they were so afraid of a king coming to power again. So it didn't really give them didn't give the national government enough power to tax or enforce laws. And so really the states were on their own, like they made their own currencies and stuff. And so the Articles of Confederation didn't have enough power to do anything, and the states were more separate instead of a union. So the states came together and create the Constitution to have a better, more stronger national government.
In the Articles of Confederation, each state only got one vote. And so what the New Jersey plan tried to do was to try and revise that and allow, the states to still have equal representation, but try and improve upon the issues that arise with the Articles of Confederation. And so the Articles of Confederation, with each state only having one vote to the federal government, it really, really limited the powers of the larger states, the states where more people resided.
You brought up the budget battle, and that's kind of an interesting thing. Madison wanted to struggle to pass laws, but of course, in this case, if you don't pass a budget, people don't get paid. People can't pay rent. Is that what Madison was going for, or do you think that's a problem with the Constitution that we should fix?
Well, so what Madison really wanted was frustrated government, so that it was hard to pass laws, and if one party took over one house, it wasn't that easy to pass everything they wanted. And so, although it might not have been what he wanted, it worked pretty well because Democrats had a big majority in the House, House and Senate. Yeah, and so Republicans really wanted the budget to be lower, and so by shutting down the government, they at least forced Democrats' hand to at least compromise a little bit. And so, while it may not have been the exact solution he wanted, it worked a little.
If laws were too easy to pass, then if one house controlled or one party controlled one section of the Congress, then it would be really easy to pass laws, and they wouldn't have to work hard to appeal their laws to all of the people in the Congress. They would just have to appeal to one house or one party. So that having frustrated government means that people have to work harder to revise their laws and to build their cases to pass laws that are good for people.
You mentioned slavery in the 3/5 clause. Do you think they would have been able to reach the Great Compromise if they hadn't compromised on slavery?
I think that slavery also had a huge impact on the Great Compromise, in the sense that when proportional representation was taken into account, slavery was added to the population of bigger states. So if slavery counted as part of a population, their say counted in the larger states. So if they had not been taken into account, the 3/5 compromise would not have taken place, and the proportional representation in the Great Compromise would be a lot more different.
And I really think that the 3/5 compromise was able to ultimately get the support of the southern states, to vote in favor of the Constitution. And I think without the 3/5 compromise, the Constitution would have not been voted in favor, and it may have not been passed. So I think they just decided to allow 60% of the slaves to count towards a population and try and put it off to a later time to abolish it.
Okay. Because of the compromise, every state has 2 U.S. senators today, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's fair? Why should Virginia only get 2, like a tiny state like Delaware gets 2? Do you think it should stay that way, or if you change?
Well, during the Constitutional Convention, there were two very different points of view on how representation should happen. So there were 2 plans, one with with like the same number of senators in both houses, and then another house that had another plan that supported proportional representation in both houses. So they had to come to some sort of compromise, where because otherwise these smaller states wouldn't have ratified the Constitution.
And I think to add on to that a little bit, the small states didn't want all the laws to be passed in favor of those big states. So it's kind of a power struggle. And so what they basically wanted to do was make sure that those large states would not be able to rule over them.
Okay. You learned in your reading that the Senate has certain powers, the House has certain powers that are special. So taking those into account, who do you think won? The big states, small states, neither?
So I think the small states kind of got the best out of the Great Compromise because they were fighting a losing battle, and if proportional representation had been in both houses, small states would have had absolutely nothing, and like nothing would have been passed their way unless they had sided with the large states. And so, even though large states got an equal amount in Senate and more in House, small states really got the better deal because with the Senate, they still have a say in government, and so it was a bigger improvement.
All right, thank you. Job well done. Sometimes I have to express a concern that students don't speak up enough, that you guys project, are forceful, and that's good. That's good. You command the audience. So this is a matter of technique. I thought that was effective. And there was good sharing. I mean, everybody's getting in on the action. And that's critical in this sort of competition. And most importantly, you were technically sound about the issues. Why was there a great compromise? What's it involved? So it's hard for me to offer a tough critique of any kind. I want to say I was pleased that you had a good grasp of the 3/5 compromise, how critical that was. It wasn't just a great compromise, no 3/5 compromise, no constitution. So both and two of them are related. You seem to really get that. So I was happy about that. We don't think of something more critical, say, but tougher critique later on.
Yeah, it's tough. You did a great job on your statement, but also you did a very nice job during questioning. It wasn't as if just one or two of you answered the question. You started out 5 people, especially with the larger groups. It's tough for everyone to participate sometimes. And you all did, and you contributed, and you didn't just, I agree with my colleague, which is what we sometimes see with teams. You also gave us details. When we asked you about the Articles of Confederation, you were able to respond with details about that. When I asked you about the budget, which was a really tough question, the two of you both highlighted that, you highlighted the fact that a minority party can get something passed. So I think you went behind the chapter and did your own research and figured out that, which was really wonderful. What I was going for when I was asking the last question was the idea that the Senate, which is of course what the smaller states like, has some powers that the House of Representatives doesn't. For instance, if you want a new Attorney General, it's the Senate that decides, the President picks them. It's the Senate that gets to decide whether they get in. So the small states have that power, which is huge. So they might have won there, but you could argue that they didn't because the House has the power of the purse, which is the money. And so I would have liked to see that, and you might have done that because it seems like all of you had the knowledge if we have more time.
Yeah.
So that's what I really like. Participation, fantastic job, really fantastic job.
I agree with everything they said, and also that as a group, you showed a lot of confidence. You obviously knew, and you weren't afraid to tell us what you knew. And I was impressed by the confidence level you had.
I thought Devin was about to jump over that table. Well done, guys.